Back when I was with, in the first training company I went with, On Target, this company On Target, along with the Flagler Business School and Hewlett Packard, they did this research project, and I've just got a couple of the outcomes from that research project, just to kind of get you to think about some things. And this research project was around dealing with executives, how to build trust and credibility with them. And so there's a couple of key points that came out of that I think are worth noting and to at least consider before we get into the probing and this whole next process. And that is that when the executives were asked, how do you establish trust and credibility to return access, to get return access, it was interesting to see the answers that came out of that. Here were the top answers. Number one was their expectations of salespeople in order to build trust and credibility was that they understood their objectives, first and foremost. And number two was that they listened before proposing, which assumes understand, which assumes you're making the right connection. And there's a lot of other interesting things in there, but I find the first two very fascinating. So just some food for thought. As we prepare and plan, how do we put ourselves in a situation when we're dealing with people where we truly understand their objectives and we truly listen to them before we propose? The other thing is executives said they'd actually test salespeople, and some of the things they did to test them is, in the first few minutes of the conversation, one, are they prepared? Have they done their homework? Two, do they ask relevant questions and do they share some kind of business perspective that has value to them? And number three, do they demonstrate good listening skills? Do they really understand? It's almost like you can't get away from this stuff. Plan, ask good questions, listen, make sure you understand, and then propose. So, let's now get into the probing or the questioning strategy. First thing is, let's talk about types of questions. The first kind of question we're going to talk about today is what we call a collaborative dialogue or a collaborative type question, which goes back to the definition we had about two intelligent people having a collaborative dialogue. And a collaborative type question is a little more involved. It's got to be well thought out in advance. And it basically has three components to it. It has a topic. Where's the topic come from?
Hot topics.
Hot topics. Either that you've developed in advance because you know your industry and your customers really well, or the customer themselves. When would that come? In the icebreaker, when we open it up, right? So back to why it's so relevant in the icebreaker to get the hot topics, because they're the core component of your questions. So it can come from the ones we created from industry knowledge. It can come from our managers. It can come from our experience. It can come from things we've heard before. And they can come from asking the customer during our icebreaker. And it has a perspective, meaning looking at things from multiple perspectives. And then it has a question. These kinds of questions are not easy to ask. They take a little bit more thought and take a little more practice. But two or three of these questions could set up an entire conversation. Then the second kind of question we're going to talk about is the follow-up or clarifying questions. And these are more based on the responses people give you, and they're a little shorter, a little specific, but they also include usually at least two of these three components, if not all three. They could still include a topic, perspective, and a question, but they're easier to ask because they're follow-ups to what people already tell you. So we'll get into much more about this, but that's the first basis. We're going to work on creating these well-thought-out, pre-planned questions, and then through that process we're going to get good at using the same format to ask follow-up questions.